Portraits are probably more important than you think about getting the most out of all of your characters, and there has been some confusion about which character needs which portrait. Maybe is it attack percent? Is it damage percent? Maybe something else? Well, today I'm going to lay it out what character needs what kind of portraits to get the absolute most. So, we're going to start out our portrait journey by not talking about specific characters themselves, rather about roles. Because you want to know the perfect portraits not just for the characters right now and for the portraits right now, but even in the future. When more characters come out, when more portraits come out, you want to still know what is the best thing that I should put on any character. So instead, it's probably better to just go through all the roles, and I'm going to tell you what each role generally will want on a portrait. And we're going to start with attackers. So for attackers, when it comes to them, where they specifically want to, of course, deal as much damage as possible with their hits. And I can tell you already, the one thing you should look out for is base attack. Because in case you didn't watch the guide video for maximizing your damage, base attack is more important than almost everything else. This is the one thing you want to start maximizing and then try to maximize everything else. So we're going to sort by attack, and we're going to look at which of these Memoria in the top slots actually also have a secondary effect that also boosts our damage really well. And you might be tempted to take the crit rate portrait right here that goes all the way up to 15% crit rate. Personally, I don't think this is a good idea, because you want to make sure that when you actually do start hitting the boss and either you get a crit or you don't get a crit, that damage you put out needs to be as high as possible. So either you go full on crit, and if you go full on crit, you'll probably do the crit damage, or you don't really care that much about crit, in which case you want to make sure that you just do a good amount of damage generally. So overall, you either want to go crit damage or crit attack instead of crit rate. And crit rate can be somewhat of a trap. Even if you're playing Yachio, I would probably not pick this one, or this one by the way. I would actually just go with attack, because you already have so much crit damage. So if you still want to invest heavily into crit damage, theoretically this one right here would be the best damage portrait in the game, because it has the highest base attack, and if you upgrade this, it gives you a grand total of 22.5% critical damage, which is a lot. 22.5% is more than a 20% attack right here. Now you might also be wondering, well, what is generally better? Attack percent, damage percent, crit damage percent? Whatever has the highest percentage on it is generally going to be the best, right? So 20% is higher than anything that has, for example, 12%, so this one is just better. But if this one was, for example, like elemental damage percent, like flame attack damage percent right here, this is 7.5% increased damage. Does that mean it's better than 7.5% attack? No, they're about the same, right? So after sorting for our base attack, we see this one has the highest number of effect, 20%, really high. We're gonna choose this one. Where's this one from? This one is from beating Nightmare Needle Witch, which is quite late, sadly, in the whole journey. Maybe you want to double down on crit damage, where you have this one, Dream of a Little Mermaid. This one is from beating Nightmare Mermaid Witch, which is a lot sooner, so you could have quicker access to this and go full on crit damage. You could do that as well. If you don't want to do that either, and you want to just look at something that does a high percentage of damage or a high percentage of attack, there's also another one that you can go for, which is the Cake Baking Challenge. Where is it? The Cake Bake Challenge, there it is. Also 20% attack up, but a lot less base attack. And where is the Cake Baking Challenge from? The Cake Baking Challenge is from beating Nightmare Dessert Witch, which is a lot sooner in the whole Nightmare Challenge, and you probably don't need the absolute best portrait up until then, so you do have some space to actually get this one, get it upgraded, do the second half of Nightmare, and then when you beat Nightmare Needle Witch, you can then grab the one from Needle Witch, and this one is going to be your best in-slot portrait for your attacker. Now what about elemental percent up? Let's say you find one that has something like this, where it's just increased damage up by 5%, or something that says when you do flame attack, for example, damage attack 10%. A lot of these that are in the game right now, they have really low base attack. But let's say, for example, that in the future they're going to release one that says, for example, on dark attack, increases damage dealt by 20%, just like this one right here, 20% like this one, but it has a higher base attack. Then it would actually be better for Homura in this case, because it has a higher base attack. If it has, let's say, 25% damage up, it would probably also be better. Even if it has slightly lower base attack, it would sort of come down to the maths. That is basically for the attackers. There is one thing that you could keep in mind, which is that what about something that increases your speed? Because this is something that you could want to use depending on the boss. If there is a boss that you break and you have good timing with your attackers, but you notice that the boss is coming out of break just before your next attacker's turn, you might potentially put on a speed portrait and see if maybe it lines up differently, and now it lines up in such a way that your attacker is getting another turn while the boss is broken. Usually this is not kind of what you want to do, but theoretically you could do it, right? You could potentially do it. So to summarize, for attackers, you want to first take a look at the base attack, what has the highest base attack, and then amongst the ones that have the highest base attack, you then choose the one that has the higher percentage of whatever damage buff it has, either attack percent or damage percent, or if you want to go freaky with crit damage percent, any of those is going to be your choice, which right now in case of actual portraits will be the portraits for beating the Desert Witch or the one for beating the Needle Witch on Nightmare. Those are some of your best choices right there for attackers. Moving on to your portraits for breakers, which is going to be the next one, you may think that you might want to pick one that has break effect on it, right? You look at something that says break effect. Certainly since it says break effect, that means it's good for breakers, right? No, don't ever use break effect bonuses on your breakers. It's terrible. I'm going to make another video where I talk more about various special mechanics that maybe are not that well known to everyone, like for example how break effect works, how break bonus works, all that kind of stuff. But break effect is basically a useless stat. To give you just a TLDR, when you break the boss takes a one-time tick of damage, and that one-time tick of damage does more damage if you have more break effect. But that one-time tick of damage does like 1,000 damage, and even if you had like 100% break effect, that still would only be 2,000 damage. It's nothing. It is actually nothing. It is terrible. Don't use break effect. Okay, so what else to use on your breaker? Well, what you are much likely more to use on your breaker is one of two choices. Theoretically three. I'm going to start with the theoretical third option. If your breaker is going to die at some point during the fight because you're doing something really dangerous, where you fight a witch that is doing a lot of damage and your breaker is going to die at some point, yeah, okay, you might want to use one that has HP or defense up, but we're going to put those aside for now. Technically, that goes for every character on your party. If that character is going to die all the time, you may want to consider something that has defense on it, but for now, we're just going to kind of ignore that for now. And we're going to talk about the actual two options, which is either MP recovery, and in fact, when it comes to MP recovery, the one you can choose right here that I have is the one for beating the battler mode. The battler mode for the Pura Magi Madoka Magica segment, which is all the way to Walpurgisnacht. Then you get this one, which has 15% MP recovery rate when you increase it. But there's also another one, and it is this one right here, the New Specs to a New Perspective, which is not only cute, but it also comes from beating the Nightmare Chairperson Witch. There's another MP recovery rate memorial that you can use for your characters. So either of these two are going to do really well. New Specs and the Cake Party Time, both going to be really good for MP recovery. Now, when do you want to choose MP recovery? Because this is not something that you just put on your breaker like Pluvia Madoka and you just say that's it. Because it kind of depends on what you actually want to do. So most breakers, when you actually look at their stats, you will see, okay, you have their special, it takes 75 MP to throw out that special, okay? 75 MP. When you use a special, you are left with 5 MP. This is always something that happens. You're always left with 5 MP, meaning you now need to get 70 MP. A basic attack is 15 MP, and a skill right here is 30 MP. So theoretically, 2 skills is 60 MP, that is 10 MP short. How much MP recovery percent do you need to actually get to 70 then, so that you have in total 75 for the next special? And the answer is about 17%. You need about 17% MP recovery so that you can do just 2 skills to get back to your next special. And as you might have already seen from the portraits, this only gives 15%. Now you can theoretically get the rest of this by, for example, just getting hit by a boss. This is usually what happens when I do boss fights where the boss uses some AoE attack and then I get the other MP that I need, because getting hit by an attack is about 5 MP. So that would do it, right? Just with that, with the MP recovery rate percent portrait plus getting hit, that would be enough. But there's also other ways of doing that, because, for example, what if you have this portrait and you have Mami Tomoe's special, for example, because this increases the recovery rate. Or let's say you have the shield active from Kirika, because Kirika's shield, when it's active, also makes you get more MP recovery rate. That's another way of doing that. So out of all of these different sources, you need 2 of them active. So maybe it's Kirika plus the portrait. That would be more than 17%. And then you can do 2 skills and you get another special. Theoretically, you could say, okay, on this team, I might not need the portrait. I could go with something else, because if I have both Kirika's shield active and Mami's special active, that would be enough. I noticed that on Nightmare the shield goes down pretty quickly, so most of the time I don't have shield. This is why I have the portrait, to make sure that I can guarantee that I have the bonus together with Mami's special buff. And Mami's special buff also sometimes gets dispelled by bosses, so even when it gets dispelled, if I still have the shield, there's other ways of still getting to that special. So as you can see, do you want to use MP recovery? Depends on your team. Depends on the situations. Do you want to have that special rotation where you do 2 skills into a special? Because if you don't care about that rotation at all, like you don't care about your special, then you don't need MP recovery. But if you really want to do that 2 skill into special rotation, you need a portrait right here that gives you MP recovery, plus some other source, either getting hit or some other character that gives you MP recovery, something like that. But let's say you don't want to play that, or you already know that you're going to have enough sources. Maybe you have a Kaede on your team who also gives MP recovery by quite a bit, and it's going to be able to cover that. Well, then the other choice for breakers is speed. And this is something with speed, is that kind of every character wants speed, right? Attackers are like the only ones who maybe don't want it, because if they can just go full on damage, if they can just pick up the 20% attack up with really high base attack and then just let it rip, a lot of times that's enough to just kill the boss, or it's wounded so hard that it's going to die right afterwards. But for basically everyone else, speed is basically king, right? Speed is absolutely what you want to have on every single character. If this portrait existed another 4 times, I would equip it on everyone, right? It is just that important. Why is speed so important? Because the more turns you have, the better your character is. It's simply that good. So if you think about, for example, a breaker, what does a breaker do? A breaker breaks the boss. And in order to break the boss, a breaker needs turns. Now, theoretically, if you have someone like an attacker can be stronger by simply dealing more damage. You give more damage to an attacker, it is more effective, right? And speed is just another way of being more effective. But a breaker can't deal more damage. You can't deal more break damage on a breaker. That is actually not possible right now on a portrait. Because the effect to actually deal more break damage with an attacker, that is not on a portrait, it is only on effects like here, where it says increases break gauge depletion. This is the effect you want. This increases break gauge depletion. That is the effect that actually gives you more break gauge depletion, as it says right here. That is gives you more break damage. But right now, as I said, this is not on any portrait. If you're watching this in the future, there might be a portrait that says increases break gauge depletion, and that portrait would then be the actual best portrait. But since that doesn't exist, what other ways are there of actually increasing your breaker's output? Getting more turns. If you get more turns, you can use more attacks, skills, abilities, whatever, and the more turns you get, the more attacks you do, the more actual break damage you do. And because of that, increasing the speed is right now the best way of actually increasing the effectiveness of your breaker. And in fact, even when there are portraits that increase break gauge depletion, 20% speed is so much, it's probably gonna be better still. So speed for your breaker is fantastic, because more turns means more break damage. Simple. So to bring it all back together again, and to summarize, for your breaker, if you know that you can hit specific MP recovery breakpoints with your team or with the situation that you're in on whichever boss you fight, to be able to do a 2 skill into another special, or even 1 skill into special if you have some really crazy stuff, then you want MP recovery rate. if you don't want to do that, or you know you can't hit that point, then speed is absolute king, and you want to use this one right here. So the Proof of Friends again, this is a portrait that comes from beating the Nightmare Uwasa of the Commoner's Horse. That is a little bit later on in Nightmare, sadly, but there are also some other portraits that give speed, such as, for example, and this is the interesting part, the regular Uwasa of the Commoner's Horse portrait that you get for Battler mode, Uwasa of the Commoner's Horse. And yeah, so the Battler mode for this just gives you the 10%, which upgrades to 15%, which is also pretty nice, pretty nice one to have. So between those two, you already have a pretty powerful one to choose that you can use. Okay, now that we have the breaker out of the way, it actually gets a little bit simpler from here on out. So most of the stuff that I just explained about MP recovery and speed applies to basically every other role out there. So it's probably why I would assume there's not going to be much runtime left on the video comparatively to how many roles there are still left. Because if we talk about Buffer is the exact same, at least with all the buffers that are currently in the game right now, because none of the buffs that these buffers are providing scales with any stats. In Star Rail, for example, there are a lot of buffers that give you stronger buffs the more attack percentage you have, for example, right? Like Tingyun. But right here, you don't have an effect like that. If there was an effect in the future of this game's life cycle, for example, that said, increases someone else's attack by so and so much percentage of your attack, then something like an attacker portrait would actually be really good, right? But as it stands right now, you once again have the same question with, okay, can I get MP recovery rate in there to maybe get a quicker special cycle with only 2 skills per cycle? That would be really nice to get back to another special, awesome. But if you can't do that, once again, just get more speed. The more speed you get, the more turns your buffer gets. And the more turns your buffer gets, well, you're not dealing more break damage, although that too. But more importantly, if your buffer needs to buff and their turn comes around faster, they're going to be able to provide their buffs more readily. They're going to be more readily available to your party the more turns they get. But more importantly, when you don't need to buff with your buffer, they can just use normal attacks, and because they're getting a lot of turns, they can use those turns to generate a lot of skill points for your party. So for example, your Tsuruno doesn't need to use buffs until the boss gets broken. So until then, if your Tsuruno is really fast and getting a lot of turns, you can generate a lot of skill points for your party, and that's really nice. And that's also the same thing that goes for a lot of other roles we're going to talk about after this, where if they don't have anything to do, more speed means they can generate more skill points for the party. So once again, for buffers, theoretically, if in the future there's going to be buffers that scale with certain stats like attack, defense, HP, or whatever, then you might want to look into those. Otherwise, check if you can hit MP recovery breakpoints with your specific party that you have, and if not, speed, 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 speed. That's all you want to take a look at with breakers and buffers. Moving on to debuffers, there's basically this one right here that is actually quite interesting for debuffers, which increases ailment hit rate. So for debuffers, you're going to use debuffs, as the name says, as well as ailments. Right now, there's not many bosses that have like resistances to debuffs or like really high resistances, and most of your debuffers have like really high chances of inflicting debuffs. So it's not really an issue right now that you might miss a debuff. But right now, there are a lot of bosses on Nightmare and regular enemies as well that resist ailments. And that's really nice, which means that there's a percentage chance that you're just not going to be able to hit the ailment and the ailment just doesn't happen, right? Like your Ren, for example, uses the slice and the boss just doesn't get wounded. But this is where this comes in, increases ailment hit rate by 30%. This makes it less likely that enemies that have resistance, like some Nightmare bosses, will resist your ailments. Ailments are, for example, your bleed, your burn, your poison, your curse, your stun, and your weaken, which I think right now is not even on any character. So for characters where you might think that it's possible that this misses, like for example, I'm doing Nightmare mode with my Ren, and I know that on Nightmare mode a lot of enemies have resistance to ailments, so I'm giving my Ren this right here, ailment hit rate 30%. Really nice. Where is this from? This right here is actually an event memoria, even though it's really powerful for this, from the Farewell Story Part 1, which right now is already over. So if you're watching this video after this and you for some reason didn't play this event and didn't pick up the stuff from this event, I'm sorry, but there's actually another one that you can get, and this one is from Nightmare mode, Uwasa of the Anonymous Artificial Intelligence. And this is the one that you get for this, which is also another 20% ailment hit rate, which upgrades to 30%, just like the other one. But it's Nightmare for the currently, at time of recording this, final stage. So you might not have it before going there, right? So I hope you played that event to get this. Otherwise, well, just like everything I said before, you know, you can get more MP for hitting faster breakpoints, although it's not going to be quite as important for most debuffers, because most debuffers don't want to spam their skill. And if you don't want to spam their skill, you're probably not getting to a really fast special cycle anyway. But otherwise, speed, of course, speed is king for basically everyone if you can spare it. So, of course, that is also something you can take. Now, theoretically, if there are future debuffers that have a low chance on their debuffs or enemies that resist debuffs, there's another portrait that you can get, debuff hit rate right here, which I think is also, yes, it's also from the Farewell Story Part 1. So hopefully you pick this one up as well, just for the future. But that said, if you're watching this video far in the future, there's probably other portraits that also give debuff hit rate for a really high percentage as well. But yeah, that's for debuffers. Specifically, the ailment hit rate can be pretty nice. I heard this is not quite as important in PvP, because in PvP, enemies, like your characters, they don't really have like resistances to ailments. So if you have something that says base chance 100%, it's probably gonna hit even without this. But if you have something that doesn't say base chance 100%, then you might want to use this to still hit that ailment. Moving on, we have your defenders. Very simple, basically the exact same with your MP recovery rate, although not as much. Your defenders usually don't care too much about the MP recovery rate, but yes, you could do it. More importantly though, speed, of course speed, but also just straight up defense. So most defenders, they shield the party, and when they shield the party, that shield scales with defense. So of course you want to give them the extra defense so the shields are stronger. That said, depending on which boss you fight, your defenders' turns might be really far apart, and your shields might either run out, or the boss is going to break them, and then the boss is going to attack again. Or he's going to have additional enemies, and the additional enemies attack again, and then you get hit, and it hurts. So you might want to also invest into speed, once again, for your defender, just to have more turns during which your defender can actually shield the party. That's it for defenders. And this defense one right here that I'm looking at, it comes from Nightmare Rose Garden Witch, which is the very first Nightmare Witch, and is actually quite easy to fight, even if you've just beat normal mode, so you should probably be able to get this very quickly and stick it on your defender if you're planning on using one. And then lastly, we have our healers, which once again, you have the MP recovery rate that you might be able to take a look at. You have the speed, of course, for healing more often. A lot of healers are quite slow, so speed actually helps you to get the turns in you need to heal. And if you don't need to heal, of course, you're creating more skill points with your speed. Awesome. Very simple stuff once again. But outside of that, if you actually want to increase the amount of healing that you do, right now all healers scale with HP. So you might want to use something that gives you HP percentage, right? Well, not necessarily. I mean, you can take a look at whichever memoria that you have that actually gives you a high HP percentage, but for the most part, you don't actually want to probably do that. So here's this one right example, I think, is from beating Battler mode, Quilla Magia Maika, that entire segment, no, Nightmare mode even. And if you beat a Nightmare while Walpurgisnacht, you can then increase your max HP by 10% with this one, which goes all the way up to 15%. And this makes your heal stronger, but it also makes the healer survive longer. So it sounds really nice, right? But the healer is not just there to survive themselves, you want the entire group to survive. You kind of want everyone to survive. And when it comes to that, this one right here, which increases the HP recovery amount by everyone all the way up to 30% at max level, this one does indeed do quite a lot more healing and is probably the one you want to actually use. And this one actually, by the way, comes from beating normal Madoka. Like, this is the Puella Pictura for beating normal Madoka, like the entirety of Walpurgisnacht, that is. So this one is really nice to use for that instead on your healer. And there's also this other one, we're so similar, which I think is Nightmare Mode Silver Witch, which also increases HP recovery amount by a total of 30%. So this will also be very nice for increasing your healing output on your healer, and this is generally what you want to use on your healer. So yeah, these are the general stats that you want to use on your portraits, as well as just general guidelines for the future of the game as well. And of course, I mentioned a bunch of portraits in the game right now, but generally in the future, of course, more portraits are going to be released, but anything that I just explained is going to apply to future portraits as well, so keep all of this in mind. But yeah, I hope that I was able to help people out so far a little bit. That was that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and I'll see you guys next time.